Friends, I'm going to do something very embarrassing to myself, to tell you of something that happened to me some time ago. Maybe some of you haven't heard about it. I was giving an address in Cleveland, and I arrived just about lecture time in the Hotel Cleveland. I did not have time for a bite to eat, so I dressed as I am now, a kind of a holy show. And I told the 4 members of the committee that I had nothing to eat, and would they be good enough to go down to the dining room with me while I got a glass of milk and some graham crackers. So there was a waitress there, taking the orders. Someone in the early 30s. She took the orders of the 4 men, and then she looked at me, and she says, "Well, Cock Robin, what will you have?"
Travel along, Catholic pilgrims, for 1 year as we learn from Venerable Fulton Sheen, one of the greatest Catholic teachers in modern times. Join me, Amy Thomas, once a week for a short reading out of Bishop Sheen's book, Way to Inner Peace. Hello, Catholic pilgrims, and welcome to week 54. One of the questions that I get asked pretty frequently on my social media pages is, why is God allowing us to go through all of these dark times? Everything seems wrong. Everything seems bad. Where is He? And I can hear a lot of despair in people's voices. You know, people will tell me, I pray all the time. I go to adoration. I go to Mass, and just nothing ever seems to get better. And I know I can't be the only one. And I know how they feel. I really do, because in my own life, in a very personal way, I once felt very much like that. Now, the difference is that I wasn't praying to God and I wasn't seeking His help. I was just trying to do everything on my own. But I was feeling that despair, like, where is the answer to all of my cares and burdens? And it took a long time to finally come around to what the answer was and is. And that would be God. God is the answer. And so our topic for this week is simply called cares. And Bishop Sheen is going to talk to us about how sometimes people do put their cares on God, as He asks us to do in Holy Scripture. You know, Jesus tells us to cast our burdens onto Him. But then sometimes we just don't, because either we think we can do it all on our own, or, you know, people don't believe in God, so they don't think that He's even an option to cast their cares upon. So those are the things that we're going to be exploring this week. Our 3 key points are helplessness, pride, and humility. Number 54, cares. The world and modern man are learning the same lesson in the present crisis, namely, the helplessness of either to save self. A century and a half of pride has made modern man feel that the burden is on himself alone, and that if he steps from under it, there must be a crash. This kind of pride begets the greatest despair, for in a crisis it can appeal to nothing outside itself. It may well be that the world at the present time is being humbled, that we may learn that trusting in God is something else besides an inscription on a penny. God, of course, does not hold out His arms to our burden without our cooperation. Casting all our care on God is casting self on God, for self is our worst care. As a parent will not for a time help his son with his studies, if he, in the beginning, said he could learn them by himself, so God sometimes shuts Himself up from us until we are sorely in need of help. Even then, God does not force our will, but he wills that we should look squarely at the importance of self and acknowledge that we have used up all our capital, that the world cannot help us, and that we have nothing in heaven or on earth but God. The bitterest draught we will ever drink is the confession of our utter inadequacy. The world says that at this moment we are at our worst. Actually, we are at our best. We are at our worst if we fall into despair, but we are at our best if humbled we cry to God for help. The words of our divine Lord, "He who humbles himself shall be exalted, and he who exalts himself shall be humbled," Matthew 23:12, express some psychological insights as well as a spiritual fact. How often we see a man endowed with more conceit than ability, more self-confidence than resources, conducting some important business. His very exaltation brings out his humiliation. His height accentuates his nothingness. On the other hand, those who have swallowed their pride, confess their inability to perform great tasks, from that moment on grow in the esteem of men. The sporting world traditionally loves the underdog. In the boxing world, the little fighter with the small odds wins the crowd by his courage. Comedians, too, exalt themselves by allowing their straight man or guest star to humble them. The lowly violet that grows close to the earth is more praised by poets than the sunflower that always turns its head to the spotlight. The humble cast their cares upon God, such cares as business and family problems, frequent misunderstandings with their neighbors, and the culture of their own soul. There would be much less anxiety in the world if people would see that trials are often permitted by an allowing providence to purify us from sin, to detach us from what is harmful. Fellow creatures generally do not want our cares, for they have enough of their own. Only God is left to be solicitous of our cares. Throwing them upon him is done in two ways, by prayers and by faith. Prayer tells God what care is. Faith believes that God can and will lift it. No one can cast his cares upon an it. If there is ever to be a relief for the burdens of the human heart, there must be behind the universe something more than a vague power, namely, a loving Father. He who cares for the sparrows, the lilies of the field, and knows even the fall of a strand of hair from the head, will not indeed be unmindful of us, toward whom he made the greatest act of love this world has ever seen. Some wrongly believe the proper thing to do with cares is to try to banish them from our mind and to seek pleasures in order to forget them. But it is not easy to ignore anxieties. Dr. Johnson's cure for toothache, to treat it with content, is all right for those who have no toothache. Then too, pleasures indulged in too much beget their own cares. The greatest care of all, which is a feeling of personal guilt, the denial of which has produced so many mental upsets, can be relieved only by throwing ourselves on an allowing God. Aristotle said men would laugh if they were told to cast their cares on Jupiter, for his work was only to shake the heavens as a thunderer, not to draw men to him in their woes. To solve our cares, God must not only be personal, he must also be in the dust of human cares. That is why he, with full understanding of our troubles, can say, "Come to me, all you who labor and are heavily burdened, and I will refresh you." Matthew 11:28. During the Age of Enlightenment, men collectively started to formulate this idea that God wasn't really needed anymore. They looked around and they saw how great everything was. And we've talked about this before, but we were doing really well in science and mathematics. And especially in the Western world, things were looking pretty good. Obviously, there were wars around the world and things weren't perfect, but man looked around and was like, wow, look at what we can do. I don't know that we need God anymore. And so a lot of philosophers and enlightened thinkers started to promote this idea that God wasn't really needed. We could take care of everything on our own. And basically we became like mini demigods, I guess you could say. Now, people wouldn't probably say that out loud, but that was kind of their thought process. We as humans are so great. We can do anything. We don't need a God to call upon. We can fix any problem that comes along. And so we really have set ourselves up as gods with a lowercase g. And so the consequence of this is that things have gotten worse. In some ways, things are way, way better than, say, the Dark Ages, because we have medical technology that's significantly advanced, and we have really good roads, and we have airplanes, and we can travel pretty much anywhere we want, and we can access all kinds of information. But morally, people are just slipping into absolute madness. And it scares a lot of us because we don't know what to do. And so I do get a lot of people that are religious that are saying, look, we're out here praying. We're trying to help out this situation through our prayers and going to adoration and going to mass and doing the right thing by voting for people that seem like they'll be good. And nothing seems to be getting any better. I mean, we take one step forward and then it's like 15 steps back, and we just don't know what's going on. And where is God? And the thing is I know the answer. I know what the answer is. Not because I'm some kind of prophet or God speaks specifically just to me and has given me the answer to this problem. It's just because I know on a very personal level what the answer is to all this madness and chaos. Because there was a time in my life when I had a huge burden, and we've talked about this several times in this podcast. I had a huge burden, and that burden caused me to turn my back on God because I thought he turned his back on me. And I was just going to handle the pain and suffering I was going through all on my own. I did not want to cast my cares upon God because it felt like conceding to him in some way when I didn't feel like he deserved it because he let this bad thing happen. But when I tried to handle it all on my own, it became like this gigantic, heavy, cement-filled bag on my shoulders. And I didn't know how to ever lighten the load until I was humbled. And I did exactly what Bishop Sheen says on page 190. He said, "The humble cast their cares upon God. Such cares as business and family problems, frequent misunderstandings with their neighbors, and the culture of their own soul." My soul had a really bad culture. And once I finally understood that I could not do this any longer on my own, and I went to confession, became Catholic and all of that, things absolutely changed. But like Bishop Sheen says, the bitterest draught we will ever drink is the confession of our utter inadequacy. I felt that so much when I walked into that first confession time. It was so bitter to drink that draught of knowledge that I had been so wrong for so long. And it could have been handled in a much different way. That in my pride and in my pain, I had thought that I was more capable than God, which is just so sad to say. And that caused me even more pain and more burdens. And it was so ridiculous that I thought that I could handle all those things on my own. But once I actually did cast my cares upon Christ, and I really did say, okay, I'm just going to give this gigantic cement-filled bag to you. Will you please take it? It was life-changing. Absolutely life-changing. And so when people on social media ask me this question, why is God allowing all this stuff to happen? Yes, I know there are good Christians out there that are praying all the time. And yes, there are quite a few of us. There really are. But collectively, as a society, we have turned our back on God. We have said, you know what? We can do this all on our own. we've got governments, we've got capitalism, or nowadays we've got communism that can fix everything. And so we don't really need God. And collectively, as a society, we've gone along with that. The Christians in the crowd, we went along with the whole separation of church and state, which is not what the founding fathers intended by any stretch of the imagination. They just didn't want the government to adopt any national church like what had happened in England, that being the Anglican Church. They didn't want that. They did want some religious freedom and religious tolerance, but that never meant that we could never speak of God in the government or have anything to do with God in any public sphere. That's not what they ever imagined. And I know that because they opened sessions of Congress with prayer from the very beginning. They talked about God in their writings and in our documents. They wanted God to be acknowledged and to be a guiding light for our country. Now, you notice they always say God kind of in a general way. They don't ever say Jesus. And that can kind of fill that role of God for, different types of religions, but still recognizing that there is a higher power, that there is moral truth, that we should be guided by Judeo-Christian principles. That was always their intent. But we were told by the secular crowd, no, we have to separate it. We have to separate these two things. One must never speaketh of God in any public sphere, especially if it has to do with the government. And we just said, okay. We just said, oh, yeah, I guess so. Maybe we shouldn't. And in that moment, when we just turned our back on God, things really started to go downhill. And it's not as if we would be a perfect country had we not done that. I guarantee you would be a far cry better than we are today. But what happened in that moment is we told God, we can do this all on our own. We are big stuff. We don't need you anymore. We don't want you, actually. As a whole society, especially in the West. That's what we said. And God said, okay, you don't want me. I won't be here. And this is what we see. We see the fallout. Now, I know there are Christians out there who are saying, yeah, but I am praying about this. I do want it to turn around. And I get that. I pray for those things too. But not enough of us. We haven't, as a country, been brought to our knees and said, we cannot do this without you. We have to return to you. And unless and until that happens, we will continue to go down this path. Now, we'll have some victories. We'll have some moments where we're like, oh, yes, something good has happened. But for the most part, if we don't, as a country, come to our knees, and I don't mean every single human being, you know what I mean. But until we do that, things will continue down this path. And so that's why Bishop Sheen says on page 189 at the top, he says, it may well be that the world at the present time is being humbled, that we may learn that trusting in God is something else besides an inscription on a penny. God, of course, does not hold out his arms to our burden without our cooperation. We have to also hold out our arms to him. And I will say, while there are a lot of people praying for this country, and there are a lot of people doing a lot of right things, as Christians, not enough of us look different than the rest of the culture in order for it to seem like we're serious. Really serious, that we want things to turn around. Too many of us Christians, and I know I'm guilty of this too at times. I do try to be mindful of it, but too many Christians are living very secular lives to where you wouldn't know if they were Christian or not, because they do the same things as people who are non-believers and don't really care what a God out there thinks. And so we have to get real serious about our faith. Too many people do not go to church. I know that there's this popular idea that you can do church out in the mountains with your prayer time with Jesus. But that's not good enough. It's just not. Christianity is a community. We are made for community. It is not just a personal, private relationship with Christ. We have to come together. I mean, just imagine if the Christians in our country got serious about their faith. It would be earth-shattering and spectacular. It just would be. But we have to get serious about that. And then when we get serious about that and come to our knees and say, we want to come back to you, then God will say, okay, I will help you now because you've asked for my help. Like he says here, he's not going to force our will. He's just not going to. He wants cooperation from us. Bishop Sheen goes on to say, but he wills that we should look squarely at the importance of self and acknowledge that we have used up all our capital, that the world cannot help us, and that we have nothing in heaven or on earth but God. And I think that is so important for us to learn. And so, again, what can we, as the everyday Catholic, do? You know, this is something that people ask me all the time. What can I do? What can I do? And I love that people do want to be active in their faith. And that is the key. We have to be active in our faith. Our lives have got to look different in order to attract people. There are so many lost and confused people out there who have oodles and oodles of burdens because they've been told lies. You can be a boy if you're a girl, and you can marry literally anybody that you want. And you can watch pornography all day if you want to. There's no harm in any of that. And you can live with somebody before you get married. So many people have been lied to. So many people have been lied to and led down paths that are terrible for them, that cause them to have a lot of mental anxiety, like Bishop Sheen says. Whenever we do things that aren't good for us, and then we try to deny that, we try to deny the guilty feelings that we feel, because we do all have a conscience. God does speak to our conscience. But when we deny it and then we try to just go about our lives and keep doing our own thing, living by our own wills, we will have a lot of mental anxiety. We will not be spiritually, emotionally, and mentally healthy. It's just a fact of life. It's just true. And so, what we have to do as Catholics, we got to be completely active in our faith. Like I said, we got to look different. We got to show people that there is a God, and this is how he transforms your life. And if you're hurting inside, and if you have a lot of burdens and a lot of cares, you don't have to handle it all on your own. There is a God who loves you, and he wants to have a relationship with you. And not only that, when you enter into his church, you're going to have this gigantic community who can pray for you, assist you, help you. You have the saints in heaven and the angels that are all there to help with all your burdens. You don't have to do this alone. Human beings weren't meant to do things on our own. And we especially weren't meant to do things without God. Every aspect of our life, we're supposed to be including God. And so evaluate your life. I know there are a ton of people out there, a ton of Catholics who pick and choose what they want to believe with regards to what the church teaches. And most of the time, they're following what the world says because they don't want friction. I don't want friction. And they've bought into this wishy-washy Jesus who just allows anything. That is not true. It's just not true. We have to stand for something. As Catholics, we have to stand for what the church teaches. It can be hard. You're going to get friction. People are not going to like you. Not everyone will be your friend. But when they look at us, and when the secular world looks at us, they have to see something different. They have to see that we do stand on principle, that there is a line that we draw in the sand that says, no, this moral issue, you can't just throw it away. We have to talk about this. And what you're proposing is not okay. And this is why. And we got to educate ourselves in our faith. We have to be reading scripture. We have to be reading books about the saints. We have to look different. We can't be engaging in forms of entertainment that are damaging to our souls. We have to show people that Jesus truly does transform. And if your life isn't being transformed, it's probably because you're holding Christ at bay and saying, I like to invite you in just a little bit because I want to cover myself, but I don't want to invite you all the way in because there's still some things that I like to do that I know you wouldn't approve of. And so if you could just stand over there on the sidelines, that would be great. And we have to humble ourselves. We have to recognize our need for confession and that trying to deal with sin is difficult. And we're going to need grace, and we're going to need help, and we're going to need our guardian angel, and we're going to need St. Michael's help, and all of those things. And it's all very beautiful when we do humble ourselves and say, I need help. Please guide my life. And that's where real change comes. And the cool thing is if you start doing that, you don't have to be loud and bombastic about it. But all those people who are hurting out there, who have been lied to and are trying to do, the enlightenment thing, be their own little mini God, which only causes pain and misery. When they see you, you're going to look very attractive to them. And I don't mean like, oh, hey, baby, you look really attractive to me. I mean like attractive with the light of Christ within you. And they're going to wonder. And they may not, fall at your feet and say, tell me everything about Jesus. But they're going to wonder and they're going to ask questions. And they may even fight you on it. But still, you're going to be planting seeds. And that's what we're called to do. Is plant the seeds. God will do the watering. And then, hopefully we can bring these hurting people to Jesus, and they won't feel so helpless anymore. And they can realize that there is our loving God there who wants to help them. And hopefully in that moment, their pride will come crashing down. They will be humbled, but that's a good thing because that is where Jesus can finally get into your soul and start doing some amazing work. So that is all for this week, Catholic Pilgrims. I will see you back here for week 55. And until then, live the faith boldly and travel well.